Hello everyone. Welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night podcast. Story 1. The Father and the Valley of Death. New Jersey, 1971. The setting is a magnificent Tudor-style mansion situated on a sprawling lot in Westfield, home to the John List family. They were the quintessential American middle-class family. John, a successful accountant, his wife Helen, and their 3 lovely children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. On the surface, they were the picture of stability and faith. John List was a devout Lutheran, known for being polite, well-dressed, and always wearing a suit and tie. But beneath that perfect facade lay a financial abyss and a crumbling soul. Starting in 1965, John List began losing jobs and repeatedly failed in business ventures. Instead of facing the truth, List chose secrecy, driving to work every day as usual, but actually spending the time reading newspapers at the train station. He had drained his mother, Alma List's savings to maintain the deceptive appearance. List, obsessed with shame and the fear of poverty and spiritual failure, could not accept his family having to live in disgrace or be pushed onto welfare. In List's mind, a horrifying idea took root. Better to bring his family to God than let them suffer worldly humiliation. On November 9, 1971, John List decided to act. That morning, he drove to pick up his eldest daughter, Patricia, from high school. Immediately upon arriving home, List shot her in the head. Next was his wife Helen, after she returned from a doctor's appointment. After committing the murders, List dragged their bodies and placed them on sleeping bags in the spacious ballroom on the 3rd floor, a room rarely used. List then went to his mother, Alma List's apartment on the 3rd floor, and coldly murdered her as well. List remained frighteningly calm. He ate lunch, wrote letters to his pastor and law enforcement, explaining his actions as a way to save his family's souls. In those letters, List asserted that since he could not provide for them materially, the only way was to send them to heaven so they would not be corrupted by the sinful world. That evening, his 2 youngest sons, Frederick and John Jr., returned from soccer practice and school. They were also murdered immediately upon entering the house. For the next 3 days, John List lived among the 5 bodies in the mansion. He mechanically maintained his routine, playing the radio loudly so neighbors wouldn't hear anything, cutting his face out of all family photos to complicate identification, and adjusting the air conditioning temperature to slow decomposition. Before leaving on November 12th, List turned on all the lights in the house, turned on religious music, and left a note on the door for the milkman. The final scene was the 5 List family members lying still in the ballroom under the dim light, concealed by the twisted piety of the man who killed them. It took nearly a month when the children's teachers became concerned and alerted the police for the gruesome massacre to be discovered. The List mansion had become a symbol of the complete breakdown of the American dream. John List then vanished. He lived under the name Robert Clark, moving through several states, remarrying, and working as an accountant. He kept his perfect secret for nearly 18 years, until the case was reenacted on the show America's Most Wanted in 1989. An old neighbor recognized him. When arrested in Richmond, Virginia, List was still the same neat man, suit and tie. When confronted with his crime, List stated he still believed he had acted correctly to save his family's souls. The story of John List is a chilling reminder. Sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from our own loved ones, from the dark corners of faith and despair, concealed by a perfect smile. Story 2. Bloody Honeymoon Night in Niagara, Texas, 2002. Clara Harris and David Harris were the image of a power couple. Both were successful orthodontists in Houston, owning a thriving practice and living an enviable upper-class life. They had 3 adorable sons, a large home, and luxury cars. Clara, a beautiful and ambitious woman, believed her marriage was complete. However, this romance began to fracture when David started having an affair with Gail Bridges, a former employee at their clinic. Clara's suspicion turned into painful truth when she hired a private investigator. The detective confirmed that David had rented a room at the Hilton Houston NASA Clear Lake Hotel to meet his lover. On the night of July 24, 2002, Clara, along with David's stepdaughter, followed the detective to the hotel. As predicted, they encountered David and Gail Bridges exiting the elevator. Rage immediately erupted. In the hotel lobby, Clara lunged at Gail, pulling her hair and hitting David. The chaotic confrontation ended when David and Gail retreated into an SUV, attempting to leave the parking lot. Clara Harris, who had completely lost her mind, turned to her Mercedes-Benz S430. She jumped into the driver's seat and floored the accelerator. The hotel surveillance footage, which later became key evidence, recorded the entire horrific sequence. David Harris was standing outside his blue SUV, likely attempting to negotiate or protect his mistress. Clara's black Mercedes sped toward him. It slammed directly into David, throwing him into the air before he fell to the ground. David Harris was still alive and attempting to get up, but Clara did not stop. Without a moment of hesitation, she circled back, driving over David a second time, and then a third. The repeated ramming was not an accident. It was a deliberate, direct, and brutal act. The sound of metal colliding and the cries were muffled by the engine. While Clara was committing this terrible murder, David's stepdaughter, Lindsay, was sitting in the back seat of the Mercedes, witnessing her stepmother kill her father in horror. Lindsay screamed in desperation, begging Clara to stop, but to no avail. Clara Harris stepped out of the car. She did not call for an ambulance or attempt to save her husband. Instead, she merely stood and watched David's motionless body, blood pooling on the asphalt. The police arrived shortly thereafter. During the trial, Clara Harris's defense team tried to argue that her actions were caused by temporary insanity brought on by betrayal. However, the video evidence and the testimony of the victim's stepdaughter were undeniable. The jury rejected the argument for negligent homicide. Clara Harris was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. A woman who had everything: career, money, family, chose to end it all in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Clara Harris's crime was not just murder, but the complete destruction of a family under the weight of betrayal and unbridled jealousy. Story 3. The Daughter's Perfect Plan. Tennessee, 2011. This story revolves around the Potter family in Mountain City, Tennessee. But the focal point is Janelle Potter, a young woman described as being chronically ill and overly protected by her parents. Her parents, Barbara and Marvin Potter, were fiercely protective of their daughter. However, the relationship between Janelle and her parents was far from simple. Janelle used her health and social issues as a tool for manipulation and control. It began with a romance. Janelle met and fell in love with Jamie Curd, an older man, but the relationship was strongly opposed by her parents, especially Marvin. Marvin believed Curd was unworthy and dangerous. As the confrontation escalated, Janelle and her parents began receiving threats via text and email from an anonymous person calling himself Chris. These messages accused Janelle of indecent behavior, and threatened to harm the family. The Potter family, particularly Marvin, believed that Jamie Curd or his friends were the perpetrators behind these threats. Marvin, a former police officer and familiar with firearms, became obsessed with protecting his family, turning their lives into a solitary, fearful fortress. Marvin and Barbara believed they were facing a sophisticated attack and turned to Marvin's brother, cousins, and anyone they trusted for help. However, on February 28, 2011, tragedy struck. Marvin and Barbara Potter were murdered in their home. Marvin was shot multiple times, and Barbara was brutally killed. Police immediately suspected Jamie Curd or hired assailants, but as they investigated deeper, they uncovered a horrifying truth. The threats from Chris were completely fabricated. They were all the creation of Janelle Potter herself. She had created the false identity to drive a wedge between her parents and Jamie Curd, and more importantly, to manipulate her father, Marvin, who then sought out an old friend, Billy Payne, to resolve the problem once and for all. Janelle had convinced her father that Curd and his friends were plotting to kill the entire family, making Marvin feel cornered. But when Marvin asked Billy Payne to deal with Jamie Curd, Billy and his accomplices saw an opportunity to exploit the situation. Billy Payne discovered that Janelle was the one sending the messages, but instead of exposing her, he blackmailed her. Janelle, trapped in her own web of lies, agreed to comply. Ultimately, Marvin Potter, believing he was acting to protect his daughter, joined Billy Payne and another accomplice. But instead of killing Curd, Billy Payne decided to eliminate Marvin and Barbara Potter, to silence them and seize their property. Janelle Potter, who instigated everything with her lies, was convicted of first-degree murder as an accomplice. She was sentenced to life without parole. This story exposes a terrifying aspect of family crime: the cold manipulation of a daughter toward her parents. She used their blind love and protection to create a world of illusion, which culminated in a brutal murder, proving that the killer is not always the one who pulls the trigger, but perhaps the one who pulls the string of deception. Story 4. Secrets Beneath the Snow. Beverly Hills, California, 1989. In a world of opulence and privilege, the Menendez family was an icon. Jose Menendez, a wealthy and powerful entertainment executive, and his wife Kitty lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Beverly Hills. Their sons, Lyle and Eric, enjoyed a life most people could only dream of: luxury cars, prestigious private schools, and never having to worry about money. However, life inside the mansion's doors was an entirely different story. On Sunday night, August 20th, 1989, Lyle, 21, and Eric, 18, called 911 in a state of panic. They claimed they had just returned home from watching a movie and discovered a horrifying scene: their parents brutally murdered in the living room. Police found Jose and Kitty had been shot at close range with shotguns. The scene was staged to look like a mob hit or a botched robbery. The case immediately drew national attention. Who would want to kill such a wealthy and powerful couple? In the following months, Lyle and Eric became the focus of media scrutiny. The brothers did not exhibit the expected grief or fear. Instead, they quickly indulged in an extravagant lifestyle. Within 6 months of their parents' death, Lyle and Eric had blown through nearly $1 million of their inheritance. They bought houses, Porsche cars, Rolex watches, and launched expensive business ventures. This behavior raised the suspicion of the police. The turning point in the case came when Eric Menendez began attending therapy sessions with Dr. L. Jerome Oziel. During the sessions, Eric confessed details of the murder. Dr. Oziel, after recording these confessions, sought to alert the police. The arrests of Lyle and Eric in 1990 caused an even bigger sensation than the original crime. The brothers admitted to the murders, but their motive became the subject of intense debate at the trials. The prosecution argued that the motive was pure greed. Lyle and Eric wanted to inherit their parents' $14 million fortune and escape their strict control. Meanwhile, the defense presented a completely different story. Both brothers had been victims of brutal physical, sexual, and psychological abuse at the hands of Jose for years. They claimed the murders were an act of self-defense, erupting in a panic attack as they feared their parents would kill them first. The courtroom became a dramatic stage filled with tears, horrific testimonies about abuse, and the audio recordings of Eric's confession. The public was deeply divided between seeing them as cold-blooded murderers or desperate victims. This division led to the first jury failing to reach a unanimous verdict. But in the second trial, the prosecution succeeded in proving that greed was the primary motive. In 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The story of the Menendez brothers is not just a murder case driven by money. It is a profound tragedy of internal destruction. Hatred and betrayal crept in between people of the same blood, turning kinship into the most chilling of crimes, a secret forever buried beneath the cold snow of Beverly Hills opulence. She planted a dark idea in the young boy's head. If Greg died, Pamela would receive the life insurance money, and they would both be free and wealthy to start a new life. Initially, Billy Flynn hesitated, but under Pamela's control and promises, he agreed. On the night of February 4th, 1990, Billy Flynn, along with 3 other teenage friends, broke into the Smart family's condo. Greg Smart was home alone. When Greg walked in, Billy Flynn pointed the gun at him and shot him in the head. Pamela Smart, who had arranged to be at a school committee meeting at the time, returned home and called the police. She staged a perfect scene, claiming a robbery had occurred and her husband was the victim. In the days following the crime, Pamela appeared on television, crying and pleading with the public to help find her husband's killer. Her composure and acting ability convinced the public that she was a grieving widow. However, police quickly found holes in the story. Detectives began focusing on Pamela's relationship with Billy Flynn. Eventually, one of Billy's friends cooperated with the police, secretly recording a conversation with Billy Flynn where he confessed to the crime. When arrested, Billy Flynn revealed the whole truth. Pamela Smart was the mastermind. She not only planned the murder, but also convinced the teenagers that the act was necessary. At the trial, the story of the glamorous teacher manipulating vulnerable students to commit murder for greed and sex shocked America. Pamela Smart was convicted of first-degree murder as an accomplice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life without parole. Billy Flynn and his accomplices were also convicted of murder. Pamela Smart's crime is a chilling testament to how marital infidelity can lead to the most brutal conspiracies, where a wife turned trust into a deadly pact with her young lover. Story 6. The Devil Father in Colorado. Frederick, Colorado, 2018. Shanann Watts, 34, was a pregnant wife and mother and an active presence on social media. She frequently shared her seemingly perfect family life with her husband, Chris Watts, and their 2 beautiful daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. Chris, who worked in the oil industry, was known to everyone as a gentleman who loved his wife and children. On the surface, they were an ideal family living in a Colorado suburb. But in reality, their marriage was on the brink of collapse. Shanann and the girls returned home in the early morning hours of August 13th, 2018, after a long trip. A few hours later, Chris Watts committed a horrific crime. He strangled Shanann, who was pregnant with their third child, a boy named Nico. Chris's motive was that he had started an affair with a colleague and desperately wanted to escape his marriage, which he felt was stifling. When Shanann returned, she learned about the affair and told Chris she could not forgive him. After killing Shanann, Chris Watts loaded her body onto his work truck. At this point, his two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, woke up. The most shocking act of cruelty was that Chris drove the two living girls to a remote plot of land belonging to Anadarko Petroleum where he worked. On the way, the girls reportedly asked, "What is happening to Mommy?" At the site, Chris Watts strangled each of his daughters, an act of cold, calculated brutality that is difficult to comprehend. He then dumped his wife's body and the two girls' bodies into separate crude oil storage tanks. On August 13th, Chris called the police, claiming his wife and daughters were missing. He appeared on television, feigning distress and pleading for his family's return, urgently telling viewers how much he missed his daughters' giggles. Chris's performance deceived the public for a few days, but police and the FBI quickly grew suspicious. Details in his statements didn't align, and Chris's overly calm demeanor in the face of tragedy couldn't conceal the truth. Under the pressure of interrogation, Chris Watts finally confessed. Initially, he tried to blame Shanann, claiming she had killed the two girls and he had only killed her in a rage. However, forensic evidence refuted this statement. Ultimately, Chris Watts had to admit his crime. He killed his wife to be free to be with his mistress, and killed his two daughters to erase all traces of his former family life. The Chris Watts case sparked an unprecedented wave of outrage in the U.S., highlighting the horrific truth that sometimes people can murder their dearest loved ones purely out of selfishness and a desire for a new life. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. His crime was not just murder, but a profound betrayal of trust, the utter destruction of a complete family. This story remains a chilling reminder of the demons hidden behind a father's smile. Story 7. The Vengeance of the Betrayer. Orange County, California, 2010. Daniel Wozniak, 26, was an aspiring actor about to get married. On the surface, he was a man with a bright future, preparing for the biggest role of his life on stage. However, Wozniak was deeply immersed in gambling debt, and desperately, he plotted a savage crime to solve his financial problems. The first victim was Samuel Herr, 26, an American veteran who had served in Afghanistan. Herr was someone Wozniak trusted and considered a close friend. Herr had recently been discharged from the military and received a large sum of money. Wozniak knew Samuel Herr was in possession of a significant amount of cash, around $62,000, and devised a cruel plan to steal it. On May 21, 2010, Wozniak lured Samuel Herr to an attic at the Los Alamitos Theater, where he claimed they would search for a secret storage area together. When an unsuspecting Herr entered, Wozniak shot him in the head. After killing Herr, Wozniak did not stop. To divert the investigation and make police believe Herr was the killer who had fled, Wozniak decided to kill another person. The second victim was Julie Kibuishi, 23, a mutual friend and Samuel Herr's ex-girlfriend. Wozniak sent text messages from Herr's phone, luring Julie to Herr's apartment. When Julie arrived, Wozniak shot her, then undressed her and staged the scene to look like a sexual assault. Wozniak's goal was for the police to conclude that Samuel Herr had killed Julie Kibuishi in a fit of rage over their former relationship, and then fled. After committing the crimes, Wozniak took Herr's bank card and withdrew all $62,000 in cash to pay for his wedding and his gambling debts. While police were actively searching for Samuel Hare, suspecting him of killing Julie Kibuishi, Wozniak continued his normal life. He even attended his own engagement party and attempted to proceed with his wedding as planned. However, Wozniak's perfect plan collapsed when police discovered surveillance video footage showing Wozniak using Hare's ATM card. When arrested, Wozniak finally confessed to his crimes, leading police to Samuel Hare's dismembered body hidden in El Dorado Park. Daniel Wozniak's crime was not just murder for money. It was a series of acts committed with cold calculation and a complete lack of compassion, all intended to betray the people who trusted him. At the trial, Wozniak was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The truth about his callous disregard for human life, all for money and a wedding, led to him receiving the death penalty. This story is a chilling warning of how greed and financial pressure can turn a close friend, a seemingly trustworthy community member, into a brutal serial killer, destroying not 1, but 2 families. Story 8. The Vampire Mother. Springfield, Oregon, 1983. Diane Downs, an attractive young woman with distinctive blonde hair, was a postal worker in Oregon, divorced and raising 3 children: Christy, 8, Cheryl, 7, and Danny, 3. On the night of May 19, 1983, Diane drove to McKenzie-Willamette Hospital, covered in blood, with a horrifying story. She claimed her car had been flagged down on a desolate rural road by an unknown man. This man allegedly attempted to carjack her and then shot her and her children. Cheryl was dead. Christy suffered severe brain damage, and Danny was paralyzed from the waist down. Diane sustained only a minor injury to her arm. The story of the brave mother under attack quickly drew media attention, and the public expressed deep sympathy. Diane became the focus, appearing publicly with a look of grief and repeatedly recounting the story of the strange man with the bushy hair. However, detectives quickly noticed inconsistencies in Diane's testimony. Diane appeared too calm and even strangely cheerful in interviews. She couldn't recall crucial details about the attacker, and most importantly, there was no evidence of an actual attack occurring outside the car. Police soon discovered Diane's true motive: a man. Diane was obsessed with a man named Robert Knickerbocker, who had made it clear he did not want children in his life. Diane, who was fixated on being free to pursue Knickerbocker, came to a chilling conclusion. Her children were obstacles. Diane purchased a gun and practiced shooting. Then, on that fateful night, she personally murdered and wounded her children inside the car. Instead of immediately calling for help, Diane drove slowly to the hospital to allow time to stage the scene. The most horrific discovery came from the survivor's testimony. After months of recovery, 8-year-old Christy Downs, who had suffered severe brain damage, began to recover. Once Christy was able to communicate, she testified against her mother. Christy's testimony was clear: "Mommy shot us." She recalled that the only adult in the car that night was her mother. Christy's testimony completely unraveled Diane's performance. At the trial, the prosecutor painted a picture of a cruel mother who was willing to dispose of her own children to pursue a selfish life. The public dubbed her the Vampire Mother for her cold indifference. Diane Downs was convicted of murder, attempted murder, and assault. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. Diane Downs' crime is one of the most heartbreaking examples of family atrocity, the ultimate betrayal of a mother against her own child, proving that there is nothing more terrifying than the nurturer becoming the destroyer. Story 9. The Broken Vow. Fall River, Massachusetts, 1892. This is a story that has become a gruesome legend in American folklore, immortalized by chilling nursery rhymes. The Borden family lived in a stately yet stifling house in Fall River. Andrew Borden was a wealthy businessman, known for being frugal and strict. His wife, Abby, was the stepmother to his two adult daughters, Emma and Lizzie. The relationship within the Borden family was highly strained. Lizzie Borden, 32, and her sister Emma did not get along with their stepmother. Both sisters felt they were treated unfairly by their father, especially regarding financial and inheritance matters. On the fateful morning of August 4th, 1892, the atmosphere in the Borden home was thick with discomfort and illness. At about 10:30 a.m., Andrew Borden went out for work. Inside the house were only Abby, Lizzie, and the maid, Bridget Sullivan. Around 11 a.m., Bridget heard a loud noise upstairs. When she went to check, she discovered Abby Borden had been brutally murdered in the guest bedroom. She had been attacked with a sharp object, likely an axe or hatchet, with multiple blows to the head. Not long after, Andrew Borden returned home from his errands. Lizzie told him that her stepmother had gone out to visit a sick friend. Andrew went into the living room to rest on the sofa. At about 11:30 a.m., Bridget Sullivan, who was resting in her room, heard Lizzie screaming, "Emma, come quick! Someone has killed Father!" Lizzie told the police that she had found her father savagely murdered on the sofa, his face crushed beyond recognition. Horrifyingly, Andrew was attacked just minutes after returning home. Lizzie Borden quickly became the prime suspect. She was the only one, besides the maid, present in the house. Her statements were contradictory, and her demeanor in the days following the crime was described as cold and completely lacking in grief. Furthermore, police discovered Lizzie had burned an old dress a few days after the murder, which she explained was stained with paint. Police found no signs of forced entry. Both victims were brutally killed with a similar instrument, likely a broken-handled axe, later found in the basement. The clearest motive was financial. Lizzie and Emma had argued with their parents over recent property transfers, and their deaths would ensure the sisters inherited Andrew's large estate entirely. Lizzie Borden's trial caused a massive uproar because the idea that a woman of her social standing, a Sunday school teacher, could commit such a savage crime was unthinkable at the time. In the 1893 trial, despite strong circumstantial evidence, the jury found Lizzie Borden not guilty after deliberating for just over an hour. The main reason was the prevailing belief that it was simply impossible for a woman to execute such a brutal act. However, the public did not believe in her innocence. Lizzie and Emma moved out of the old house, bought a new mansion, but were completely ostracized by the community. Although legally acquitted, Lizzie Borden lived the rest of her life under a cloud of societal suspicion. The story of Lizzie Borden is a family tragedy whose secret remains forever buried. It is a warning about the lingering hatred among those of the same blood, turning a home into the scene of a brutal massacre. A family vow betrayed by the swing of an axe. Story 10. Christmas Tragedy in Texas. Dallas, Texas, 1999. Christmas in Texas is often a mix of dazzling lights and cold nights. For the Bruce Blackman family, this holiday should have been a moment of peace. Bruce, a mechanic, and his wife Susan, along with Susan's 14-year-old daughter Kelly, lived in a small suburban home. Like many stories we've explored, the Blackman family wore a veneer of normalcy. But underneath was the rot of a marriage plagued by domestic violence and control. Bruce Blackman was a severe alcoholic with uncontrollable outbursts of rage. Susan had endured his mental and physical abuse for years, mainly out of fear for Kelly's future. It all culminated on Christmas Eve. Bruce had been drinking since the afternoon, and it began with a minor argument over a gift or a broken Christmas light. But the words quickly escalated into bitter insults, bringing all the long-simmering resentment and betrayal to the surface. In an uncontrollable fit of rage, Bruce Blackman attacked Susan. He beat her savagely, then strangled her to death, right next to the brightly lit Christmas tree and the unopened presents. Christmas Eve, the night of serenity and hope, became a night of blood and despair. After killing his wife, Bruce had no plan, only panic. He did not want Susan's daughter, Kelly, to discover the crime. When Kelly returned home after church service with friends, she innocently walked into the house, unaware of the tragedy that had just occurred. Bruce did not hesitate. He ambushed Kelly, using her own baseball bat to brutally murder her, ensuring there were no witnesses left to his crime. The love and protection a stepfather should offer were replaced by the coldness of a killer. Bruce Blackman then attempted to stage the scene as a botched robbery, or perhaps, in his mental chaos, he was merely trying to bury the truth. Susan and Kelly's bodies were discovered on Christmas morning when a neighbor came to visit and found the door ajar. The scene inside was a horrifying contrast. Carefully wrapped gifts, Christmas carols cut short on the stereo, and blood staining the hardwood floor next to the tree. Bruce Blackman was quickly arrested. He initially tried to resist the police, and then, during interrogation, he confessed everything. The reason was simple, yet chilling. He felt isolated by Susan, stifled by the very life he had created. Bruce Blackman's crime is a tragic culmination for our series. It brings together all the elements we have explored: family atrocity, the breakdown of the husband kills wife and stepfather kills stepchild relationship. Motive, a combination of domestic violence, alcohol-fueled rage, and a desperate desire to escape responsibility. Betrayal, the complete destruction of trust in the sanctity of the home. Bruce Blackman was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. This series, The Kinship Vortex, American Family Atrocities, has pulled us through the darkest corners of the human soul, proving that the most terrifying horror stories are not always found in the shadows, but are often lurking right behind the doors of the most unassuming homes, waiting for a moment of weakness and despair to erupt. Thank you for exploring these gruesome secrets with me.